To our sponsors panel session, and welcome. This is one of our key events over the next couple of days, so we're glad you're here. Once again, if you have food or beverages in the auditorium, if you could take those out. We have some water up here, we're just not included. I want to make an announcement. Our junior senior analyst session is the last session today, and there's some updates to the rooms and who will be speaking in those sessions. You can check your Moores app. If you haven't checked it out already, we have a really nice app for this symposium. Once you sign on, you can enter your email and your own password, and then when you select the 84th Moores Symposium as your event, you just want to enter the password 84th Moores. That's 84 lowercase th, capital M, capital O, capital R, capital S, and capital S. And that'll get you in with the most latest information. So the Junior Senior Analyst session this afternoon, we have Dr. Mark Gallagher, the Air Force, Captain Brian Morgan, the Navy, Dr. Tom Allen for the FFRDC, and our Industry Senior Analyst is Ms. Tammy McNeely from Lockheed Martin. So we hope you attend those. Just an announcement. Okay, thank you for that. So our main purpose here is to talk to our Moores sponsors, and we really appreciate the time that they spend with us throughout the year to provide us guidance and support and camaraderie within our society to make sure that we're on track and that Moores continues down the path that they've helped us set over the past 50 years. So I'll introduce each of our sponsors who are here today. I will have some questions and that we have shared with the panelists, and they will answer some questions. And then after that, we'll have about 30 minutes for you to ask questions. So it gives you plenty of time to build up your question bank, and then we'll have 2 microphones floating around. When you do ask a question, I ask if you stand up, say who you are, where you're from, and then speak in the microphone. Thank you. So in terms of our Moores sponsors, working from my left to right, we have Mr. Chuck Orchado. He's our Moores Navy sponsor, the Deputy Director of Assessments Division at Unit 1. We have Dr. Forrest Crane, our Moores Army sponsor, who's the Director Center for Army Analysis. We have Ms. Lynn Baldridi, sorry Lynn, representing our Moores Air Force sponsor. She's the Principal Deputy Director, Studies, Analysis, and Assessments at Headquarters Air Force A9. And at the other end, we have another Marine, Dr. George Ext, our Moores Marine Corps sponsor, our Senior Analyst at the Marine Corps Combat Development Command. So let's all join me in welcoming our Moores sponsors. So this is an unclassified session, as you probably know. I just want to make sure you know that. So first, as a background, change seems to be happening very fast and frequently in our national security community. Decision makers continue to have short attention spans and make decisions based on that time-limited information because they need to make decisions quickly. Data continues to grow and OR analysts are in bigger demand. Soon we will have a new administration, a new set of elected officials, and Moores has turned 50, and we're continuing to support an expanded role in the national security community. So within that context, I want to ask our sponsors the first question. So what are your organization's top 2 challenges? And what organizational capabilities or support are you targeting to address these challenges? And we can choose who goes first.
I'll go first. First of all, very happy to be back after a few years working with the submarine community. As we say in the Navy, I'm working in RAID again, so I have missed being at Moores and having an excuse to come and speak and catch up with everybody. So our big challenge in the Navy, as I'm sure the other services will agree, is money. But ours, I think, is uniquely characterized by the fact that if you picture a tripod, we've got the leg for maintenance, we've got the leg for recapitalization, and we've got the leg for modernization. And as we try and do our optimization, balancing that is constrained by political influences over which we have no control. So I'd say the big challenge for the Navy is managing to keep the balance between that capability, capacity, trade, at the same time informing leadership on when we need to make some hard decisions on that.
Well, before I address that question, I really would like to take a poll of the audience just so I can get a feel for who I'm talking to. How many of you are from industry? If you would, just raise your hand. Okay. Academia? The Army? Navy? Air Force? And Marines? Any allies? Well, I got you. And the Coast Guard. Okay. Great. Homeland Security. Okay. And the OSD? One. And the Joint Staff. This is one back there. Yep, one. Internationals in the back. Yeah, I can't see that. Okay, good. Let me talk first from the Army perspective and not a CAA perspective. One of the major challenges that the Army has, unlike the other services, is we do not have an integrated analytic capability at the department headquarters. We used to have a DUSA OR. We decided to eliminate that in 2006, and we've yet to replace that. However, during that time, we have put in place several mechanisms and forums to coordinate ourselves between the various analytic organizations and with some of the sister organizations, both on the FFRDC side and with the other services. So we put in some bubblegum and Band-Aid solutions to try to bridge to whatever it is that we end up going to from there. And I can talk more in depth on that because we are going through a headquarters realignment and reorganization as I speak that also involves additional cuts, but nonetheless there is a reorganization that's going on at the headquarters that may or may not address some of those challenges. So unlike N81, unlike A9, and unlike George McSick, we do not have an integrated analytic capability at the department level. The second one goes back to what you were mentioning there, Chuck. We have seen over the past several years, as all of us have, an ever-increasing demand for analytics. Analytics to support programmatic decisions, analytics to support analysis of alternatives as we look at modernization efforts. We've also seen an increase in demand for analytics in the wargaming arena. Not so much a function of Secretary Works' initiative, because we had already been conducting wargaming support for op plan development and support of the COCOMs and the Army Service Components. But as well, we have been supporting within the department the DPG work on scenarios which we all have been involved with as well. That work continues to increase, and I'll tell you from my perspective at CAA, the demand for that has darn near doubled in the past couple of years and probably going to triple before too long. Fortunately, recently, our Vice Chief of Staff of the Army was able to give us some relief by, in effect, freezing some authorizations within CAA so we wouldn't continue to reduce but retain at least a level of wargaming capability. So wargaming, programmatics, the future force, all those demands continue to increase. Now on the downside, as we continue to cut, and on top of that, we still are presently, at least within CAA, under a hiring freeze, which has created over the past several years a bubble or a trough that we're going to see merge up into the middle management and perhaps the senior leadership at some point in time before those lines cross over on that. So we've got a challenge in trying to manage our current workload with the future capacity, and that internally is not just isolated to CA. I think Jim Amati, you're facing the same thing as well, and I think Pam is out at the track as well. So those are the two major ones. One of them at the Army level for integrating analytic capability at the department level, and then meeting the increasing demand while the capacity continues to dwindle. The downfall on the second one that I'm a bit concerned about is maybe we might miss developing some analytic capabilities that we just don't see yet. And there may be some demand for that in the future. Don't know what it is. It could very well be in the realm of cyber or some areas. So while the capacity may be going down, there may be analytic capabilities that we are prepared to expand or to develop as we look to the future.
Well, I'm going to start with you saying, Lynn Baldry, I haven't ever seen her. What's she doing in Analytic Forum? Well, I actually have been an analyst my whole military career, but the Air Force wasn't one of the hardcore ops research folks. The Air Force sent me to a lot of jobs which were career broaders. I'm getting to my point. And because of that, I ended up in my career, I was promoted to 06 as an ops research analyst, but I found myself in personnel, and that ended up causing a job before I had this one, to be in civilian personnel policy and PNR, personnel readiness and OSD. It's a far-flung place that does really important work, and one of the things we did was career field development and management for civilians. I know we have a mixed force here in industry. I'm not, these remarks aren't really towards you, but they are for the military and civilians. So I use that to lead in to say that Congress cares a great deal about how the workforce is developed in the functional communities and demands a report every other year at OSD, and I was in charge of putting that several hundred-page document together, at least for 2 of the 3 years I was there. These kind of forum wars are hugely important. It may be, I mean, Space Bob was just reviewing with me that, you know, in A9, not everybody belongs to MORS. I mean, that would be ideal that people do, but here's the thing strikes me. We know that motivating the workforce, part of it is you've got to have professional societies, you have peer-reviewed journals and so forth. That doesn't trip everybody's trigger that's in our career field, but it is important for those who continue to want to have recognition and advance within the career field. So I wanted to say it's a pleasure to be here amongst analysts. I feel like I'm back home, and I've loved being back in A9. And so to address the Air Force challenges, I knew by the time I spoke, my colleagues, and George hasn't even spoken yet, we're going to address, we're all sharing the similar things in terms of dealing at the higher Air Force level with all of the challenges and all the many ways analysis can help inform decision making. But I'm going to take the other perspective, and that is, I care. The problem we're working within A9, and we'll start there and we'll grow bigger, is managing the workforce. And we did contractor civilian conversion about 7 years ago, hired a lot of really smart people. Here's what we're finding. They're really good at what they do technically, and they really want to grow. And so they might have been hired to run a particular model, but we got to help harness that excitement and energy. We have a development program in the Air Force. I'm going to next week to do the co-development teams, and I'm going to forget the count, but I want to say 11 A9 people out of our civilian workforce of about 70 applied for additional developmental opportunities. Not saying they want to leave A9, but what I'm saying is there's a demand out there. And so it's something for you all to be thinking about for MORS is how we transition a workforce that is so largely military, at least in the Air Force, to continue to contribute and leverage all of that. So that's our challenge within A9.
Good morning, and thank you everyone for coming to this session. After, I suspect most of you were here at the earlier session and heard my boss tell you a lot about what we do down in Quantico and MCITIC and how he looks toward analysis for the Marine Corps. So, in answer to your question, Norm, in answer to all your questions, what he said. Try to get perhaps a little bit finer grained, and he's touched upon some of these things as well, to pick out 2 areas, and there's, you know, it's just kind of random as to which 2 I might select. But 2 of the things that I think he's touched upon is one, providing analytical support for the development of our POM. And this is a thrust that he has sort of instituted from the beginning, from the day he stepped into the office. He wants us at MCITIC, who are part of the planning process, and then typically in the past we would turn it over to PNR, who are part of the programming process, is to facilitate the transition from planning to programming and have the planning process, in a sense, identify, review, scope, and prioritize Marine Corps needs, so that when it gets over to the programming process, they're more of making budgetary type decisions and not making requirements type decisions. And in the past, to be perfectly frank, oftentimes a lot of decisions had to be made about juggling things around in the POM, especially when last minute things came up. And that often took place up north as opposed to down here. He wants to shift the emphasis down here, and he wants the analytical process to review all of the requirements, all of the potential capability enhancements that we may be adding to the POM, what kinds of things we might be taking out of the POM to make room for those, and provide a prioritization for the Marine Corps so that when it gets into the programming process, it's more straight programming instead of programming and requirements prioritization. And that seems to be moving forward. We're developing a number of collision techniques to do that. The other area that I think he mentioned, I'm going to lump two things together that maybe aren't typically lumped together, are wargaming and LVC, live virtual constructive support to the Marine Corps. And those are, I think, two areas in which oftentimes traditional operations research analysts have not been directly involved in, or oftentimes are not involved in or involved in the periphery. And I think he wants to get us more deeply involved in those processes. And we have been providing support directly to the war games. He mentioned the MAGTF Warrior 2016 war games that took place over the last few weeks, in which 1MEP and 2MEP played the force structure COAs and tried to help identify what are the pluses and the minuses and the strengths and the weaknesses of those COAs. And then on the LVC front, basically a lot of people seem to equate LVC, live virtual and constructive, with training. In fact, there's a term called LVC-TE, LVC training environment. And we look at LVC as more broadly than that. I think there are a lot of communities outside of the training community that can make use of LVC. One that comes to mind fairly quickly is the operational test community, in which we can make use of LVC, perhaps reduce the cost and scope of some of the experiments that the test community has to hold in order to evaluate systems, and take advantage of LVC type capabilities, as well as take advantage of commonality between LVC to support test and LVC to support LVC to support training and to support test and evaluation, have to support experimentation, et cetera. And so without reinventing the wheel for each of those different communities, when we develop LVC capabilities, try to develop those that might be in common across the entire LVC spectrum.
Thank you. As a follow-up to that, we wanted to ask you about what organizational capabilities, operations research or otherwise, that you're developing within your organization, and these could be tried and true or new, emerging, that you're developing to help address some of these challenges. Mr. Larcher.
So we just had a leadership change in Navy. As you're probably aware, we had Admiral Greenert as our CNO for the previous 4 years, and he was a student of Pentagon behavior. He had been vice chief, he had been the N8, he understood how to build a POM, he understood how we assess the POM, and he could call the colors on a stoplight chart. Admiral Richardson, on the other hand, was a pure operator. He had been Submarine Development Squadron 12, he had been Group 8, he had been Commander Submarine Forces, and he had never set foot in the Pentagon, as far as I'm aware. And so it was a fresh pair of eyes looking at our product for the first time. Now, he had been my boss down at Submarine Force, so I thought I knew what he wanted, but the first time we went up to brief him, he started asking why. So yes, I got it. Air-to-air warfare, quantifiable metrics. How come you don't for offensive cyber? How come you don't for counter C4ISR? And things that we had assumed we wouldn't be able to assess for him, he wanted assessed, and he wanted assessed pretty quickly. So we've been working on a lot of the non-kinetic warfare areas, figuring out ways that we can assess that in a way that will satisfy senior leadership desire. And if you see me tomorrow, I was cowboying something this afternoon.
Dr. Crane?
Let me preface my response by just making observations over about the past decade, or the past decade and a half, yeah. Since 9/11, quickly shifted after 9/11, the focus in supporting the immediate. We started ramping up to support commands that were deployed both in Iraq and Afghanistan, have analysts on the ground to supporting them, develop reach-back mechanisms in order to support that, and even surge capabilities as needed to go out and support the current operations. We expanded capabilities to start meeting what was called operational need statements, which are requirements coming from the field that identified various kinds of systems or capabilities that they needed to support their operations. So we ramped up and stood up that kind of mechanism over the past decade and a half. That's been dwindling. We're out of Iraq, we're coming out of Afghanistan, and we're starting, I don't want to say reaching a steady state, but we're on the decline. So consequently, the analytic demands of our senior leaders is changing as well. It's no longer for the immediate as it was in the past, but it's more looking towards the future. Looking towards the future of what the Army may look like in 2025 and beyond. What kind of capabilities, what kind of doctrines, what kind of organizations do we need to support that, and the concepts associated with it. And then on the operational side of the house, the shift of the COCOMs and the service components has gone to, instead of executing operations, planning operations. So now the demand for wargaming and support of development of op plans and the exercising of those op plans. And even for some of the immediate needs, such as the situation that we're seeing in Europe with the Russians, and then in the Middle East with ISIS and whatnot, we still have some day-to-day current demands on that, but a lot of that effort is shifting in those directions. So what's that mean in terms of capabilities that we need to be taking a look at? Well, I submit to you that probably cyber is the first one that comes to mind. We know it's out there because of the classification levels. Maybe some of us don't know what is out there or how it can do yet. But that is a capability for which I think, at least in our case, we need to do a lot better in representing its effects within our war games, within our analyses and whatnot. A second area that also comes to mind, in fact, was the result of today's RIS Prize winner. That was data analytics that they were applying there. And if you have a chance to see that presentation, they developed a capability that can reach into existing databases and do big data analytics to identify things, to focus efforts. And if you notice the title of it had to do with financial stuff. We're talking about movement of monies between thugs, mugs, and bad guys, terrorist organizations. And at the present time, that particular piece of work supported about $10 billion worth of interruption of that kind of traffic. And that's just the tip of the iceberg on that. So I'd say those are two capabilities that we certainly need to improve on for us, is cyber and data analytics.
Thank you, Dr. Crane.
Well, if Mr. Williams were here, and it's very important that I emphasize this, we are expanding our capacity to do warfight campaign analysis that includes cyber and space effects. He also is very committed to looking at, I'll call it big data analytics. He may not use exactly those words. These are really hard problems. They are classification challenged with the SAP and so forth, so it makes it hard to sort of get a really ongoing, free-flowing dialogue in those areas. So for sure, he's focused on that. As I'm sitting here listening, I'm realizing, I know that each service has a different culture. So what I'm about to describe may resonate exactly with y'all or not. So you're saying, what tools should we develop for our senior leaders? What's in demand? What's in demand is what's always been in demand. Is can you guys give me that high-fidelity answer quickly like that? Well, no. So we might have a warm base. We work very hard to be thoughtful about what we have in our warm base. But what I find that we have to do, on the air staff anyway, is to keep the tasking of the DPG front and center. We have, and again, I'm kind of breathless at the speed with which my colleagues on our air staff are willing to make decisions and forward things up to senior leadership. Like, okay, so sometimes what I find we have to do is recognize the flow of the energy of the decision making. I mean, we're not alone in having to manage our force structure constraints. It's well known, those who follow this, that we tried to retire the A-10, but Congress didn't think that was a good idea. Neither did the Army. Okay, so it's back. Well, some TOA had to shift around. So now we're sort of in this, how do we cover down on a high-end fight? We are not giving up on that. But it's kind of as though we have to say, we know you've got to deliver quality answers. You do the best you can with what you have, but when it comes down to it, your chief is testifying in front of Congress. You want to be rock solid that that answer is as right as it can be. So you got to be very clever about how to leverage work you have with the appropriate assumptions and caveats. So I find that we have to pace ourselves with the energy on the staff to get to decisions and solve the problems in the immediate. It's not that they don't care about the future, but I do find on their staff, there aren't as many organizations concerned about post-FIDIP and the FIDIP after that as we are in our integrative function. I don't know if we're going to get to their questions, so I want to throw this out. The other thing we need are much more agile tools. So I'll say that and just say, we're leaving it to our analysts to help us sort that out. We're going to do it in a more organized fashion at A9, but there is an example of a tool that Dr. Mark Gallagher, very fortunate to have him on our staff. He devised a Bayesian enterprise analytic model. I always have to spell it out because Bean, that's what I know it as. He's working with Johns Hopkins right now, but for a couple of years he really couldn't even find an engine, or even academia in the setting, who could sort of develop how to approach the problem. And what he's talking about is running policy options on an aggregated warfight, just sort of see just quickly, rapidly on aggregate information, sort of take a look at different policies. It's kind of wargaming with rigor. So those are among the things. I know that he's pressing the envelope, and we're happy to push him to the forefront and make the whole community better. So,
Thank you. Dr. X.
Well, if you recall, the question is, how is senior leadership using analysts today? And the answer is what he said. Exactly how he's using analysis today. The Navy rep just mentioned to you that he's dealing with a new CNO, one who has perhaps never even stepped foot in the Pentagon before in a formal job. Marine Corps is in a very similar situation in which General Neller just took over as Commandant last summer, and he may have some small time in the Pentagon, but the majority of his time has been out and away from the Pentagon, and he's a real Marines Marine. He's been out in the operating force and doesn't think like a Washington bureaucrat. And it's very interesting when the Washington bureaucracy meets an irresistible force of somebody who doesn't think that way. And he's a very a guy who wants to do things very quickly, and that's difficult to do here in Washington. And he doesn't quite understand why we just can't make a simple decision and buy a $300 million program when it seems to him like the most logical thing to buy. And oftentimes it may appear on the surface to be the most logical thing to buy, but as you dig a little deeper and take a look at perhaps the cost of maintenance or the actual true procurement cost versus the manufacturing cost or some other aspects of the problem which may not be initially apparent to the decision maker, the decision is not always quite so apparent. And it's great having a boss who is willing to say, let's present the decision maker with all of the facts, not just the ones that appear on the surface, and let them make a more informed decision. He's not trying to preempt the decision maker's priorities and authorities. What he's trying to do is give the decision maker all the information that they need in order to make the best decision for the Marine Corps. And as he mentioned in a number of cases, the initial gut reaction for the way ahead, after spending some time listening to what all of the facts around the decision is not always your initial impression of what the right decision to be made. And we got to give credit to the Commandant that while he does sort of initially push back on you, and part of that may just be his style, to force you into a corner to get more information in order to make a decision. He is very willing to listen to the facts before he makes a final decision, and he's done that a number of times. And analysis has actually prevailed in helping to sway what the initial direction was. As far as organization, some of you may know that we, in our Operations Analysis Directorate, just reorganized based on my new boss's thinking in terms of he wants analysis to underpin everything in our organization. And so instead of having a very flat organization with a bunch of branches, we now have a much more streamlined organization in which we just have two divisions, and one major division within OAD is internal analysis, the analysis that supports MCSIC. Then we have another division which is external analysis supports the rest of the Marine Corps, analysis supports forward deployed analysts, etc. And so we have reacted and responded to our boss's desire to change how analysis supports Marine Corps. As far as a couple of specific areas, skill areas that we're looking at, I mentioned wargaming and LVC, and we need to figure out the right analytical tools to support those areas. And we are working in that direction, and we're learning as we're going along. And then the other area, which the Army rep just mentioned up here, is cyber. My boss likes to expand the notion of cyber into information warfare. And in fact, he just stood up, the Marine Corps just stood up an assistant deputy commandant for combat development integration who works with General Walsh for information warfare. And so that's another area in which I think analysts need to continue to work to develop the proper tools and techniques to help incorporate the implications of information warfare across the entire warfighting capability spectrum. So those are a couple of areas in which I think we need to continue to work to improve our tools and techniques, and they may be very different than the tools and techniques we've seen in the past.
Thank you, Dr. Axt. Our next question for our panelists is a follow-up to this thread. And some of you have started to answer this question, so you can feel free to expand on it, or that's fine too. We want to ask how are your senior leaders in your organization using your analysis now as compared to how they've used it in the past?
I thought that was a previous question.
Well, we're building on capabilities, the capabilities that you need. And so certainly, if you, I know you've addressed that already, you can pass on that one. Okay, so we answered that question. And everything you heard up till now. We're going to move on to the next. Thank you. As we face the need to bridge the gap between the current administration and the new one, what, in your view, is the most important to focus on for continuity and change management? And if you could talk a little bit about how the Morris community can help with this, that would be an added benefit to us. So focusing on continuity, change management, and then how we can help. Question 3.
All right, thank you. First of all, for George, we've noticed the mental alignment between the two senior officers in the Department of the Navy. God help us all. Let's be realistic. We have 2 leading candidates from 2 parties that cannot be more diametrically opposed. So there's 2 possible outcomes for November. We could wind up with a new administration that thinks that the last 8 years were about right and feels they have a lot of experience in government and are looking for continuity. We could also have a new administration that thinks the last 8 years were a disaster and that they got it all wrong and we need to make a lot of changes right away. So I think we'd be kidding ourselves in June to sit here in Quantico and say, we know how to prepare to support the next administration. What I would recommend is that we figure out how to be as flexible as possible and have a quickly retrievable database of any recent studies and maybe do a few more that explain why we do what we do and how far you can change before you break something. So I would say, I wouldn't call it defensive analysis, but I would be ready to train, and anything Morris can do to help, train a new administration that may go out of their way to pick people from outside the government to get fresh ideas. And alternatively, we may have a new administration that thinks status quo is good, and we may think that, no, we do need to change some things. So flexibility being the watchword.
I share somewhat of a similar opinion, Chuck, on that. To maybe put some little refinement on it. In general terms, I think we need to be able to articulate to our incoming administration the ability to execute the national security strategy and the associated risks with those. And that could go either way, depending on which administration we run into. 2 vehicles or processes that do come to mind that help inform that, I think, come down in the sense of the General Defense Review that we do every 4 years, and periodically, and sometimes that turns into food fights over resources, sometimes it doesn't. And then the other one is the Support to Strategic Analysis, or SSA. And the reason I say that one is because over the past year, the DepSecDef, back in February, I think of last year, he initiated it with a memo of wargaming innovation. And that sort of got the department thinking about wargaming and bringing in analysis and looking at war plans of the current and the future and whatnot. And then he followed up with another memo of the SSA revitalization. So he was turning that mechanism on too, to be the construct in which the war games would inform those things. And then most recently, in fact, this month, I want to say the 10th of June, he published the fiscal year 2018 Defense Analysis Guidance, which goes into more detail with regard to the DPG and the scenarios associated with it. I don't think all those will go away entirely, regardless of what administration comes in, but that may be the vehicle for which we can posture ourselves to address whichever administration we come into. So DPG, or the SSA and QDR, I think may be some areas that we might focus to posture ourselves.
Perhaps blessedly, I would say, briefly, to answer, I think Mr. Ricciardo and Boris's answers are exactly on. The one I was going to add was about in time, don't know how rapidly change may happen. So I too am of the opinion that the defense planning guidance is probably going to retain some familiar aspects. You talk about a near-peer competitor, it's hard to picture an administration change your perspective, but how one prosecutes that and how that gets expressed will have to be agile about. But I do think we need to be that calm, steady voice. This isn't the time to change our story. We don't have it. We're not. The advantage we have as analysts is we know what the truth is, given the caveats and assumptions. We can recreate it. We can reproduce the answer, and that's what we may need to do through different lenses. There are huge demands on the Air Force about how to sustain readiness, how to regain readiness, and I know the other services have the same issue. So, continue to look for techniques and methods just to keep surfacing and thinking clearly as people rush to try to take advantage of opportunities on the Hill and so forth, because we've got to be sure our story is always consistent today, 6 months from now, unless the assumptions change.
This is nothing new other than perhaps the differences of opinion perhaps between several of the potential candidates for president and how things may change. But things are always going to change to a certain extent when you move from one administration to the other, and most of us have been around long enough that we've been through 2 or 3 or 10 of these administration changes, and so I don't think that the general challenges for the analytical community are really that much different. As we've all mentioned here, I think the analytical community needs to remain flexible in order to be able to support quickly and perhaps have things on the shelf that you can pull out the direction in which we are told to turn, or keeping the same direction. So I think it's all a matter of flexibility in our analytical community and being able to respond quickly to the new challenges that might face us.
Great, thank you. Our fourth question, we want to talk about wargaming. So the wargaming buzz continues. Moores has held our first successful professional gaming special meeting last fall. And my little plug, we'll hold our second meeting this fall. Is Phil out here in the audience? Here we are. Thanks, Phil. So Phil's leading our second wargaming meeting this October in Alexandria, Virginia. So the question, have you seen an uptick in the use of wargaming? And is this providing better information for our decision makers? And what do you see as the potential for using a combined wargaming and operations research analysis approach?
Okay, so I put my notes down because I thought of a different answer this morning. I was driving in and I went by what I consider one of the premier land navigation and indirect fire training courses, by which I mean Meadow Bonner Golf Course. And I thought about that. When you play golf, everybody loves to hit the driver because you might go 250 yards and you feel like a hero, but you also might spray it in the woods and you're not expected to be that accurate. Well, in the tool bag that is OR, I think wargaming is the driver. So wargaming may hit a home run. You may find a great new ConOps, or you may find an adversary technique that you hadn't thought of, and it's very valuable. However, the next time you play that war game, you might get a different result. I can hit a driver 250 yards, I just can't do it twice in a row. So if you think about wargaming that way, if you can't replicate the experiment, it's going to have limited utility when you try and make some kind of recommendation to senior leadership. So I think wargaming makes sense when we use it in its proper place. It's the first club you pull out, you're developing ConOps, you're thinking of adversary reactions, you're trying to bound the trade space. Once you mature that concept and you're trying to come up with some programmatic recommendations or operational decisions, you probably want to go to a higher number club that you can lay a more precise pattern. And so if I now come up with a CONOPS that I want to experiment, I would switch over to campaign analysis and do some quantitative assessment of it before I make a recommendation. And I think the tyranny in our department is that senior leadership wants fast answers, and wargaming gives you fast answers. They may be wrong, but they'll give you a fast answer. So I've sensed the pressure just in these 2 years I've been back that we really are encouraged to do more wargaming, and we need to educate senior leadership about where wargaming works. It's a valuable tool for what we want to use it for, but it's a really bad tool for what some other people want to use it for. So in the Navy, we have a separation of authorities. N35, our Paul Mill folks, are in charge of wargaming, and thankfully they've been willing to work with us so that we can encourage them to use wargaming where it's appropriate and adjudicate it using more quantifiable techniques. So Robin could tell me how it's been going more recently, but as of the last Global, I was very encouraged. We did it iteratively so we could digest the results and assess it before the next meeting.
I love your golf analogy. That's cool. It really is. That's a good analogy. I also like the distinction that you made between wargaming and campaign analysis. I think that's a very important distinction. And I agree with the construct that you described with the wargaming, sort of the driver out of the chute, and then you start refining as you get further down. I completely agree with every one of those points, and I think across the, and I'm not criticizing anyone, but I think perhaps some of those finer points are lost on the body at large, or maybe even some of the senior leaders as they go through the debates and whatnot on this. But I agree with the distinctions that you made, and I love the analogy. We have certainly seen an increase, and I'm going to use the term wargaming and campaign analysis because I like the way you describe both of those, and in fact agree with them. We have sensed a very significant increase in demand for both of those. As I mentioned earlier, over the past couple of years. And yeah, oftentimes it's preceded with wargaming, then followed up with campaign analysis once you've at least got the refinements made in that piece of that. And that does take time. It doesn't necessarily, when you get to the campaign analysis piece of it, it does take time to get that more refined, if you will, to be useful to a decision maker, whereby the analyst or the campaign analyst has confidence that you're providing them with useful information to make a decision on that. But yes, we have seen a significant increase in that. I think the quick answers from the wargaming are certainly there, but need to be provided with the appropriate caveats so that the decision space that the decision maker is making is aware of how much latitude they have in making those kinds of decisions. They keep asking for more, and I don't see that going away, at least for the near future. I just hope it carries over into the next administration, because what I've seen with this increasing for wargaming is I've seen the analysts become more of informing the decision making than I have over the past several years when it comes to some of the stuff in the future force, at least for the Army. We've been there on the operational side, but I'll tell you, we have been more engaged with our Vice Chief of Staff of the Army in the past 6 months than I can recall in the past 4 or 5 years, just because of that demand for that kind of thing. You know, be it the long range development and planning program for ground vehicles, which we're working with the Marines, whether it be a NATO's integrated fires effort that we're doing for the DEFSEC-DEF, it's just been an increasing demand for that kind of capability on it. So I anticipate that to continue on, even past the administration.
I wouldn't characterize that we've seen necessarily an increase in demand for wargaming. I've seen an increased use of it, and suddenly we'll see something, a big decision that's floating to the senior leadership says TTX, and we'll go, oh, because that's always interesting, especially if we haven't been invited to participate. And so what I feel like, what I found to be successful is I watch, in order to position to make sure we aren't rushing to make decisions on things that are working and they lack the rigor, everything that my colleague said, is that I've watched our experts interact. You all know you can't be in a vacuum and work. You have to work with the staff, your counterparts that have important decisions to advise to, and if you stay connected with them, you see what you have that you can offer. And I find that they're very bright people on the headquarters air staff. and elsewhere. And they're just trying to solve the problem. But I do find their thinking is not as rigorous. They don't see it because they don't typically challenge one another when you got the project, you got the kind of develop the codes on the whatever. And then you lack, you guys know how it is in the cubicles. You start talking and someone goes, wow, I don't know how you got from A to B. You got to explain that to me. And I'm not sure that happens on the rest of the staff. So our analysts, as they plug in and stay agile to what they're hearing, you might not be able to jump a campaign, which we need to be able to do, which is to ask a question, at least put a pause in their mind that they have got it locked down and understand fully what the implications of the co or whatever their TTX that they're trying to leverage and move forward is. So we are seeing an increased demand, but we're trying to counter it with just staying tied in and be good partners.
Well, I found Forrest's analogy quite interesting because I just got back from last week from an annual golf trek that I take every year with my old buddies from the South Bronx of 50-year plus friendships. And I cringed a little bit because if anybody was out there watching me play, I would say if we use the analogy of golf or driving, that doesn't really say much about the value of wargaming, based on my experience the last couple of weeks. But let's put that analogy aside, at least from my perspective, and the answer is we have seen a huge uptick in the use of wargaming both internally and externally. Marine Corps and outside the Marine Corps. Mentioned several times MAGTF Warrior 2016, where we played out the two different force structure COAs. We have a group within the Futures Directorate at MCITIC called the Ellis Group, and the Ellis has been running weekly war games to explore various concepts in the Marine Corps. Forrest mentioned the support to strategic analysis, and we have seen a thrust to try to, if not replace, at least supplement some of the campaign analysis that has been traditionally done in developing analytical baselines and try to wargame some of those, at least initial analytical baselines. And we've seen a wargaming division stand up within the OSD CAPE. So I think we've seen quite a bit about it, and we have been directly supporting that and shifting some of the work we do within our organization, OAD, towards supporting those war games. We have it a little bit easier than Chuck in the sense that the wargaming division and the analysis directorate both belong to the guy who was out here speaking a little while ago, Lieutenant General Walsh. So he has seen to it that the wargaming division, which had a way of doing things for quite a number of years, as well as the Ellis division that also does war games in addition to the formal wargaming division, now get a lot of support and work with our OAD, and I think that's a positive direction. And I think that we are providing better information for our decision makers by combining the various aspects of analysis and the capabilities that our analytical tools have with the wargaming capabilities, which are, the wargaming has certain benefits and certain limitations, and analysis has certain benefits and limitations, and I think by putting the two of those together, they can be very complementary and work better together. I think the sum is greater than the total is greater than the sum of the parts. So.
Great, thank you. So now for the audience, I have one more question left, which means after this it's up to you to ask the questions. I may have asked the typical softball questions, so you can ask the hard ones. So after this question, it's your turn, so tee up your questions. Our last question here for the panel, as Moore celebrates our 50th year, as an organization, we've been through a lot and continue to provide great forums, at least we think so, for professional development, sharing, networking, exposure to some of the best and brightest in our communities. We're expanding our continuing education offerings, for example. In your opinion, where can Moores make the most impact in the next decade? And what services should we key on to increase support for our people?